about this? You all just surrender now. Deal? Stay there. Don't move. Hitting the mark is all that matters.
Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of Early Access Review, we are going to be talking about our very first free S rank agent, Harumasa, right? Being the very first free S rank agent that we're going to be getting in Zenless Zone Zero, he is also quite unique in a sense where he combines both melee and range attacks, offering very high burst damage similar to how you would play Zhu from what I've been testing out, right? Pretty low in terms of team building requirements, in the sense where you can run with any days units plus a support, and it's pretty much good to go, and very flexible, right? It is gonna be completely free to claim, so as long as the version 1.4 update launches, all players can claim Harumasa for free, along with the materials needed to level him up to level 40. Alright, so we are going to be talking about his drive disc, team comp, play style, W engine, Mindscapes, etc. So without further ado, let's get into today's content.
Subscribe!
Okay, so the summary of Harumasa's kit. So Harumasa seems a little bit complicated. There's like range, melee, all these little different stacks, the little electric bolts, and then it comes out with the electro quivers, electro prison, falling feather, a lot of different things. But it can be summarized to something very simple, which is you will essentially only use him to deal damage when the enemy is in the day stage. Just like how for Zhu, you will only use Zhu out to deal damage when the enemy is in the day state, because Harumasa's damage output goes up tremendously with the help of his core passive, additional ability, and just generally how his burst damage kit works when the enemy is going to be in the day state, right? So to kind of summarize a little bit, you will build up stacks of electro quivers. So electro quiver is the little blue thing that you see in the enemy. If you guys have played Miyabi, you can also see the Miyabi gains stacks of the Fallen Frost, right? The Frost stacks, you gain up to 6, and you can let go of your third enhanced base attack, or rather the level 3 charge of your base attack. So for Harumasa, instead of the stacks being applied to himself, the stacks are going to be applied to the target. So this electro quiver stacks, they're going to be very important when it comes to understanding how Harumasa works, but essentially you can understand them as once you press and hold your base attack, which is going to be you enter into the bow mode and you shoot the enemy, all of the electro quivers will be launched, and it will fire the Ha Ato Noya. So it's basically deal a little bit of damage, and then it will apply Electro Prison up to 8 times, lasting 10 seconds. While a target has at least 2 stacks of Electro Prison, they will be X marked. So Electro Prison is the part where if you were to use a dash attack from Harumasa, this will instantly place him into close range. So you can see from the live trailer as well, from a very far distance, once you press and hold your base attack from a bow, he will instantly dash into the enemy to activate his sword attacks, right? So all these are going to be the melee close combat sword attacks, and they do deal a lot more damage compared to his ranged attacks. So for Harumasa, the damage rotation is essentially daze the target as soon as possible, build up your electro quivers in the meantime, and when the enemy is going to be in a daze state, enter into your melee mode or your awakened mode and it'll deal damage, and then once that is gonna be done, you can then rotate back into his EX skills, his ultimate, or even his core passive, which allows him to get another 6 stats, and just repeat the process all over again. Ideally, in the perfect scenario, you would be able to do a maximum of 12 melee attacks, the 12 melee attacks under his awakened state, and then he needs to be recharged again, and then you gotta swap to your stunner, swap to your supports, and the cycle kind of just repeats itself, right? So that is basically the summary of how you will play Harumasa. Very similar to Zhu from the testing, right? So now jumping straight into Harumasa's basic character kit, his basic attack launches up to 5 piercing attacks. Honestly, all this you don't need to care. The only thing you need to care is that your 5th hit of the basic attack, it will generate 2 electro quivers. After activating a chain attack, the next time you activate your 5th base attack, it will instantly generate 6 electro quivers, which is why you really want to break the enemy, daze the enemy as fast as possible, because gaining these 6 stacks will allow us to enter into the melee or rather awakened stage a lot faster compared to just 2 stacks when the enemy is not going to be in the daze state, right? So that is part of the puzzle of Harumasa's kit. The rest of the stuff, you don't really need to care about it that much. So that is basically that. You can generate 2 electro quivers for the 5th basic, 6 electro quivers with your EX special, and 6 electro quivers from your chain attack, right? So your 266 is gonna be something you want to remember, but almost every single time you would be getting the maximum 6 stacks of electro quivers all the time, because you will very rarely use your 5th basic attack under normal circumstances to generate 2 stacks by 2 stacks. That's just way too slow. It is much better to just use a stunner to daze the enemy as fast as possible, and then Harumasa will just enter into rotation, and that's gonna be it, right? Now, for most units, you don't really care about their parries and dodge counters, but for Harumasa, his dodge counter is actually extremely important, because it is gonna be part of the dodge counter hidden edge, which is the dash attack, right? So this is the part where it is directly tied to his awakened status, where you will do your melee damage. Run forwards to the closest X mark enemy and execute a powerful slash dealing electric damage. It will consume 2 stacks of electro prison with every single slash, which means you can in fact do up to 4 slash in a single combo, because while you can only hold up to 6 electro quivers, you can gain another 2 more stacks of electro prison when they are going to be X marks, right? So under normal circumstances, you can only do 3 separate melee hits, but because of his additional ability, you can gain another 2 stacks of electro prison to the target when you are hitting a stun enemy or enemies under attribute anomaly, which is why most of the time during your burst stage, your day stage, you can hit 4 melee hits every single time with Harumasa, and the cycle will always rotate itself even if you only get 6 different electro quivers, right? So dodge counter is actually going to be a very important part for Harumasa, and it is highly recommended to level this up as much as possible. In fact, more important than his basic, than his ultimate, than his EX special skill, right? Then for his ultimate, it's just a very simple electro burst damage. Not too important, don't need to care about it. Basically just use his ultimate towards the end of his combination when you run out of all of your electro quivers, right? And then finally we can just talk about his core skill, but at this point it is more or less going to be covered. The intro kit for Harumasa has been explained, but just a little bit bonus, the core skill is just a added damage buff for our melee attacks to do more damage, right? So the crit rate of our dash attack, which is going to be our melee attack, is increased by 25%, and when our dash attack triggers a critical hit, he gains 1 stack of gleaming edge, stacking up to 6 times, lasting 5 seconds, and it will reset the duration. Every single stack will give us a 12% crit damage buff, which means that we can in fact get a 72% crit damage and 25% crit rate. All of this is going to be from his melee attack, which is going to be why Harumasa, majority of his damage is going to be coming from the melee damage, right? So that's going to be that. And then for additional ability overclock, very easy to trigger using either a stun or anomaly, and you definitely want to run Harumasa with a stun, because having the enemy stun as fast as possible is going to make our damage go up a lot higher compared to stunning enemies at a slower pace, right? So if we're going to be attacking a stun enemy or under a attribute anomaly, damage increased by 40%, as well as getting 2 additional stacks of electro prison while using his falling feathers, right? So that is basically it for Harumasa's entire character kit. Honestly, a very straightforward kit compared to units like Miyabi. You want to daze the enemy as fast as possible, apply your 6 stacks of electro prison, deal your damage with your awakened state via your slash, your dash attack slash, which is a melee attack, and the cycle repeats itself up to the absolute highest capability of 12 stacks when played efficiently. And then once that is done, you swap back to your support, swap back to your dazer, and everything just repeats all over again, right? So that is gonna be that for Harumasa's character kit. Now moving on to Harumasa's W engine. His signature W engine is gonna be Zanshin Herb Case, 48% crit damage and crit rate increased by 10%. Dash attack for your electric damage is going to be increased by 40%, and when any enemy applies an attribute anomaly or stun, increase your crit rate by another 10%, which means you can get 20% crit rate and 48% crit damage from this signature W engine alone. But however, Harumasa is actually not that reliant on his signature weapon, because you can see from this chart over here, there are actually a lot of substitutes compared to Harumasa's signature W engine, especially when you go to compare to our previous early access review Miyabi, because aside from Miyabi's signature W engine, no other anomaly W engines offers her crit value. Whereas for Harumasa, there are plenty of alternatives, such as your Brimstone, which is Soldier 11, your Nico Mata, Zhu Yuan Ellen Jo, or even the S5 Aaron W engine. A lot of alternatives, and you can see that they all fall within a very close range between 10% to 15%-ish damage drop-off compared to the W engine, right? So Soldier 11 is going to be coming at the closest substitute at around a 7% DPS loss, and Nico Mata, this is going to be assuming that you are hitting a target from behind the back, right? So then you get the absolute highest benefit for only 10% DPS loss. This is also not too hard to trigger with Harumasa, because if you're going to be using a team that dazes the enemy very quickly, since it's going to be a burst DPS, you can always easily position Harumasa to behind the target, and then you can gain the full benefit from Nikomata's W engine. Then Drew and Alan Joe, they are roughly around the same caliber, because unfortunately Harumasa doesn't really benefit from their effects that much, but it's still going to be a roughly 12 to 14% damage decrease, right? So TLDR, for Harumasa, a lot of alternatives, so not that relying on his W engine, especially when compared to Miyabi. So moving on to Harumasa's drive disc, frankly speaking, it is very flexible, and players can essentially just change into whatever has the best subsets, right? Your 4-piece electric, your 4-piece crit rate, which is going to be a woodpecker, your 4-piece hormone punk, all of these 4-piece honestly work around the same caliber compared to one another, as long as your crit subsets are going to be good enough. For Harumasa specifically, not that recommended to run the 4-piece woodpecker, because you do need to keep in mind that your buff duration is going to be counted separately, so you might not get the absolute highest benefit of 27% attack buff compared to, for example, a 4-piece electric, which is always going to be pretty much a permanent 28% attack buff, especially if you were to pair up Harumasa with Qingyi, which means the enemy can remain in shot for a very long duration, right? So for the 4-piece, best recommendation is probably going to be Thunder Metal, followed by our 4-piece Hormone Punk, just for another attack percentage. And then if you really have an excellent subsets for your 4-piece Woodpecker Electro, then that's going to be that. And then for our 2-piece, also extremely flexible. You can go for the crit rate, you can go for attack percentage, you can go for pen ratio. Whichever one has the best subsets, it can pretty much work for Harumasa, right? Then for our main stats, in our slot 4, it's always going to be our standard crit rate or crit damage. And then for our slot 5, it's either going to be pen ratio or electro damage. And then for our slot 6, it's just going to be attack percentage. Don't really have too much of a flexibility here. You will basically build him exactly like how you would build a Zhu Yuan or a Alan, but except this time he's just going to be an electro DPS instead of a ice or ether DPS, right? And then finally for the subsets, it's going to be as per normal with any of our crit subsets. Crit rate, crit damage, attack percentage, pen, all of them work, and that is pretty much how you're going to be building Harumasa for his W engine as well as drive disc, right? Very straightforward and easy to use character. And now jumping into Harumasa's Mindscapes. His Mindscape 1 High Spirit, this makes his burst combo a lot higher, because as of this current moment at M0, your maximum time you can launch a melee attack is going to be only 4 times. So this is going to be 6 plus 2, that's going to be a maximum of 4 times. Now with this M1, it can actually go up to 7 times, because now it increases the Electro Prison all the way to 14 stacks. So in terms of burst, M1 is going to be allowing us to have a much more comfortable and smooth combo fluidity, especially when you want to consider players that might have a little bit of problem keeping up high uptime for Electro Quiver, especially if you don't make use of Harumasa's chain attack, right? So definitely very comfortable, especially for players that can't really achieve very good uptime for your 4 melee attacks. For your Mindscape 2, it is basically just a very straightforward stat boost, where you basically gain a 50% additional damage for your dash attack, which is going to be a melee attack, as well as 7 stacks of electro bits when you're going to be using a chain attack or ultimate, up to 7 stacks, right? So because this is going to be tied to your M1, since now your absolute highest ceiling is going to be 7 melee consecutively, it is just a very straightforward 50% attack buff. So if you're looking for the damage numbers, then M2 is going to be your go-to bet. But between M1 and M2, M1 is going to be the comfort, M2 is going to be the damage. Not really that incredibly game-changing. You honestly can run Harumasa, in my personal opinion, at M0 S0 with no signature weapon, no Mindscape, and it's still going to be performing at a very decent pace, right? If you really want to consider it, then getting the M1 is going to be very good just for the comfort, and then M2 just for the damage, right? And then for M4, Electro Prison now lasts 20 seconds, which frankly speaking doesn't really change too much, especially if you're going to be using Harumasa as a burst DPS, right? The second portion, when dash attack hits an enemy, gains 30 decibel once per use, and upon activating ultimate, apply maximum stacks of prison to all on-field enemies. So this is honestly also a very decent comfort Mindscape, which further improves our comfort, since you're going to be getting a lot higher uptime for your Electro Prisons, which means Harumasa will almost always going to be in his melee form dealing the highest possible amount of damage, right? And then finally for his Mindscape 6 is going to be ignoring 15% of our target's rest for 12 seconds, and every 12 times the enemy is going to be hit by this Electro Quiver, which is going to be the little arrow hit, triggering an extra electromagnetic explosion, dealing 1500% multiplier. So just a very straightforward damage increase in terms of a raw multiplier, as well as a little bit of an electro rest, which is one of, if not the most important debuffs when it comes to our damage multiplication, right? So overall, Harumasa's Mindscapes, not that important, I would say. You can still play him at M0 S0, M1 for comfort, M2 for damage, M4 for more comfort, and then M6 for the highest possible damage, right? So that is going to be that for Harumasa's Mindscape. Now for our final segment, which is going to be Harumasa's team comp as well as basically how you play him in battle. Just take a look at this footage very early on, because I think this will help us explain or rather visualize exactly how Harumasa is going to be able to perform his combos during his rotation, right? So you can see over here, you want to first get the enemy to the day stage as soon as possible. Ideally, this team is going to be Qingyi, because as of this current moment, Qingyi is pretty much the best synergizer compared to Harumasa, because not only does she apply daze very quickly, she has stun damage multiplier on top of applying shock, which is also another way for Harumasa to gain the 2 stacks of Electro Prison, right? So get the enemy to daze as fast as possible with Qingyi, and then right before you were to daze the enemy with Qingyi, swap into a support. So in this case, it's going to be Rina dealing this buff for our entire team, and then swap into Harumasa very quickly. So it's going to be a very quick 1-2 swap. Harumasa is going to be the one to break the target, and then this will trigger our chain attack, and then this will swap back into Rina into Harumasa, and at this point, this is going to be allowing us to do our full combo, right? So you can see over here, we are going to be able to use our melee attacks, and there's going to be 6 different marks on top of allowing us to do 4 different melee attacks, right? So at the end of our last melee attack, when we bounce back, we are instantly connected back into our heavy, because there are still 6 marks, the 6 Electro Prison on the target. We can instantly trigger another 8 more marks on the target, which translates to 4 more melee attack, because remember, as long as the enemy is going to be under stun or having an electro anomaly, we do gain an additional 2 stacks, right? So this is going to be allowing us to do another 4 melee attacks, and then finally, right before everything ends, 1 more of our heavy attack will instantly apply 6 stacks of the mark as well, because remember, the very first attack you do after your chain is actually going to be applying the maximum 6 marks, as you can see from the base attack traits, right? So this will allow us to do a final 4 melee attacks for a total of 12 different melee attacks within a single daze combo. And to end everything off, you can then cast Harumasa's ultimate for the final burst, right? So that is basically example scenario of how you would absolutely maximize Harumasa's damage when the enemy is going to be in the daze state. Aside from this, it is not recommended, in my opinion, to play Harumasa outside of daze. His damage falls off quite a lot, just like how you wouldn't use Zhu Yuan's enhanced base attack, her special bullets, her shotgun mode when the enemy is not in the daze stage, right? Because not only does the stacks gain very slowly, it will eat into the field time of Qingyi. So I would much rather players just get the enemy to daze as fast as possible and then swap back into Harumasa instead of Harumasa staying on the field, dealing less damage and also not dealing enough daze damage to the target, right? So the balance is basically exactly like how you play Zhu Yuan. Just swap out Zhu Yuan for Harumasa and you're good to go. So now we can finally talk about Harumasa's team comp. Currently, Harumasa's best in slot team comp is absolutely going to be with Qingyi. No questions asked, the best in slot. If you don't have Qingyi, any of the stun units can also work. You can use units like Koleda, you can use units like Caesar King. As long as they can build up our daze multiplier, then that unit is going to be good to go. And then for our slot 3, you can either go for Rina, which is going to give us a lot more damage, or you can go for Caesar King, which is going to give us a lot more comfort. Not to mention, she also provides a pretty decent amount of attack buff, res down, etc. So it really depends on what kind of content you want, right? So that is going to be that. Keep in mind also, if we are going to be using Rina with Harumasa, then running the pen ratio main stat for slot 5 is going to be recommended. If you do not have any of these units, you can also consider running Harumasa in an anomaly team comp with Bernice as slot 2. Because keep in mind, Harumasa's core skill, it can also trigger if the enemy is going to be under an anomaly attribute. So it doesn't necessarily have to be stunned. The downside to this is, when the enemy does have an anomaly attribute, the damage that Harumasa is going to be dealing is still going to be lower compared to an enemy that's in the stun multiplier, because Qingyi's stun multiplier is just that high. So although Bernice could work with Harumasa, Qingyi is still gonna be the best in slot when it comes to the highest damage possible, right? So if you are gonna be running Bernice with Harumasa, then our slot 3 is probably gonna be Lucy, just to provide our entire team with the attack buff on top of the little trotters, which can deal a little more damage, right? If you don't want to run Lucy, then Caesar King is also a very decent alternative. She's very universal for more comfort, etc. So don't really need to humble that much. If you do not have any of those units above and they're completely free to play, or you just enter the game with version 1.4, some of these standard units can also be utilized with Harumasa. For example, you can run with Grace plus any of our A rank agents as a support, right? So Kaku, Nicole, Lucy, they can all work pretty decently with Harumasa, but just keep in mind that the damage will not be in the same playing field when compared to a team comp with Qingyi, right? So that is pretty much it for Harumasa's team comps as well as his playstyle. And with that, we have come to the end of Harumasa's early access review. Overall, a very straightforward unit, an excellent free S-rank agent, especially for players who are just entering into New Erudo and Xenozone Zero. So compared to like your A-rank DPS, like your Korean, your Piper, Harumasa is definitely going to feel like a very powerful unit. Unfortunately, if you're going to be comparing Harumasa to a monster of a unit like Miyabi, then he's probably going to not feel as impactful, right? You kind of want to just lower your expectations a little bit. But for a free-to-play player, your first ever S-rank DPS, he's absolutely going to get the job done. Think of him as the electric version of Zhu Yuan. Play him like how I mentioned, stun as much as possible, and then make the rotations. You are going to have a very good time, right? So that is going to be that. Word of the day is going to be Bullseye. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join TikTok, join Discord, and join Twitter. All the best for gacha pools, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.